God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
Listen here, you little gremlin. You don't understand biblical property law or inheritance if your life depended on it. As J. Sklar documents in his scholarly work Leviticus, a discourse analysis of the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew word for property, refers to a holding, not ownership. And in Leviticus 25, Yahweh draws a deliberate parallel between permanent landholdings and Ebed servants. Yet, in verse 23, he explicitly declares, "The land is mine. You are but strangers and sojourners with me." Translation, you don't own jack. God does. Deuteronomy 10:14 clinches it. "Behold, to Yahweh your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it." That includes people. So it is theologically impossible for a man to own another man in the chattel slavery sense. Yahweh forbids it. Now you cherry-picked Leviticus 25:45 to 47 like a dishonest clown. But as Kenneth A. Matthews notes in The Post-Racial Church, the Ger and Toshav, resident foreigners, cannot be chattel slaves. Why? Because Exodus 22:21 commands they not be oppressed, and Leviticus 19:34 says they must be loved as yourself. These people could even become wealthy and buy Hebrew servants. That's mutual indentured servitude, not slavery. And Yahweh says repeatedly in Leviticus 25 that Israel is never to be enslaved again. Missed that too, didn't you? Now let's talk about Exodus 21, you dishonest little booger. You ignored verse 20, which states that if a master beats a servant to death, he is to be punished. Death penalty. That means the servant's life held the same value as a free citizen under the law. But you tried to weasel around verse 21, saying if the servant lives a couple days, the master gets away with it. Wrong again. Exodus 21:26 to 27 slams that door shut. If the master even damages an eye or tooth, the servant is to be released immediately. That's not minor. It represents any bodily harm, as Dr. Christopher Wright explains. It covers bruise for bruise, wound for wound. That 2 or 3 day language, a rhetorical device, as legal scholar Dr. Jonathan Burnside explains in God, Justice, and Society. It's meant to summon witnesses for due process and protect against false accusations, not let abusers off the hook. Let's set the record straight, because this kind of accusation is not just historically sloppy, it's morally reckless. To call Yahweh a perpetrator of genocide is a fundamental misunderstanding of both the biblical text and the historical definition of genocide itself. Genocide, as originally defined by Raphael Lemkin, the very man who coined the term, requires intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group with malicious intent. Lemkin writes, generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aimed at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Let's now compare that to what we actually see in the Bible. Yahweh doesn't show partiality to any particular group. He judges based on behavior, not bloodline. The Israelites themselves, the very people atheists often claim were shown divine favoritism, were ruthlessly judged when they engaged in idolatry, child sacrifice, or oppression. Thousands were struck down, Numbers 25, 1 Samuel 6, Amos 2. So much for some kind of racial targeting. This was not about ethnicity, it was about justice. Moreover, the Bible repeatedly emphasizes that the nations Yahweh judged, like the Canaanites, were given centuries to repent. Genesis 15:16 even states that the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet complete showing that divine judgment came only after long-suffering patience. That is the polar opposite of genocidal intent. Furthermore, Yahweh's commands in cases like Deuteronomy 20 were not about racial extermination. They were judicial sentences against cultures that engaged in horrific practices, like burning infants alive to Molech. You don't get to wave the genocide flag while defending cultures that slaughter babies in fire pits. Finally, you cannot apply modern legal terminology rooted in 20th century atrocities to ancient judicial acts without committing a category error. There was no genocide because there was no genos being targeted for their identity. What was judged was evil behavior, and even foreigners like Rahab the Canaanite or Ruth the Moabite were spared and blessed when they responded rightly to Yahweh. So stop abusing the term genocide like it's a theological buzzword you can toss around to win an argument. If you're going to invoke history, law, or morality, do the homework or sit down. In the so-called total destruction passages, hyperbole, war rhetoric. Just like every ancient Near Eastern empire used, Deuteronomy 7 says, utterly destroy them. And in the next breath says, don't marry them. How do you marry someone you just wiped out? Exactly. The Amalekites were supposedly annihilated in 1 Samuel 15. And yet, they show up again just a few chapters later in 1 Samuel 27. You want genocide? Then go look at actual mass graves. But guess what? We don't have them. Because what we have is hyperbolic war language used to glorify divine justice and scare off future enemies. Just like the Egyptians did when they bragged about wiping out enemies they actually didn't. And now the dumbest thing you've said, claiming God approved of child sacrifice. You ignoramus. Jeremiah 19:5 absolutely buries your claim. They built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as offerings which I did not command or decree, nor did it enter my mind. It didn't even enter his mind, you theological train wreck. Case closed, scumbag.